Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webcast on functional assessment. My name is Jim Martin, and I'm a professor emeritus from the University of Oklahoma. I founded and directed the OU Zero Center at OU for 20 years. Prior to that, I taught at other universities. My entire career I've spent on studying, examining, working within secondary transition education. This involved developing lesson packages along with my colleagues, creating transition assessments, studying, writing about transition assessment, transition programming, transition practices, and an essential part of that has always been self-determination practices embedded within whatever we do in transition. And I've been teaching about transition, whether it be transition assessment, transition interventions. But with all of that said, it's great to be here. And we have a lot to cover about functional assessments because it's often misunderstood or not understood at all what it is. And the legislation doesn't do a whole lot to define it for us. All our special education legislation says is, as needed, we need to do functional assessment. Well, when is functional assessment needed? I think the shortest answer is when the other types of career and employment interest and skill assessments just don't work or are not appropriate for our students. So having said all that, I need to press a couple buttons. And let's get to the show because we have a lot of material to cover. You should see the PowerPoint on your screen now. Let me enlarge it to the presentation show. And there we go. On behalf of the Illinois Center for Transition and Work, I welcome you to this webcast on functional transition assessment. Stay tuned to the Illinois Center for Transition and Work because they're starting to do some really cool things and will continue to do this well into the future. I might add, by the way, that the Illinois Center for Transition and Work is at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign campus, where I am a proud graduate from. I received my doctoral degree in special education from the U of I Urbana-Champaign. So this is like coming back home. I grew up in Illinois. I grew up in East Central Illinois in a small farming town and worked in Illinois. And now I live in Oklahoma as a professor emeritus from the University of Oklahoma. So here we go. Functional assessment by me, Jim Martin. So we have five main things we're going to talk about today. We're going to briefly look at special education, the purpose of special education. We're going to review briefly transition assessment fundamentals. Excuse me, because I just had lunch, so excuse me. The evolution of employment programs and how they have changed over the years adds special relevance, I think, to understanding functional transition assessment. Before we actually look at functional-based assessments, we have to examine the fallacy of a one-time interest assessment, because in many ways it really is a fallacy. And then we'll examine what a functional-based assessment is and how to conduct it. So let's go. So the purpose of special ed, as defined in the first paragraph of IDEA 2004, the purpose of special education is to provide a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet students' unique needs. But wait, that's not all. And this got added in. And to prepare our students with IEPs for further education, employment, and independent living. So the purpose of special education basically is that we use special education practices, focusing on students' needs to prepare them for life after high school. So if you're a third grade special education teacher or even a preschool special education teacher, middle school special education teacher, or a high school special education teacher. Our purpose, ultimate purpose is the same, to prepare students for life after high school. So don't forget that. That's something that we always have to keep focused. We have to keep the end game in mind as we teach our students. You know, there are many definitions of career development and many career development theories. There's only one that I know of that is specific to students with disabilities. And Don Brolin, who was a professor for his career at the University of Missouri, came up with this. And I think it has especially relevant meaning when we talk about functional assessment. So Brolin's career development theory had 4 stages: career awareness, where individuals learn about the world around them, about jobs around them, just what careers are and the type of careers. Career exploration, where they go into more depth about what different careers are. And then as they've narrowed those down, the career preparation, receiving the training needed to enter into that career, and then finally begin that career. For many of our students with IEPs, their exposure to the world of work has been pretty limited. So they have limited career awareness. They've had little opportunities for career exploration. And it doesn't make any difference if somebody's 18 or if somebody's 12 or 13 or 14. Their career awareness still could be real limited. So we just don't hop automatically into beginning a career. If we want to have informed choice as a guiding principle for what we do, we have to expose students to various careers, identify what they like or don't like about their careers as well as we can, and then to provide the opportunity for students to explore those careers. And then once they've decided on an area they'd like to go, begin preparation in that particular career. The preparation might be on the job training, or it might be an internship prior to becoming employed, or it could be a formal school program. It might be a post-secondary educational awareness, a think college type program that would help somebody, go through the career exploration and career preparation process. But the point is, when somebody leaves school, whether it's high school or they leave their post-secondary education experience or career tech program, whatever it might be, then students begin their career. So we need to provide our students along the way with exposure to numerous types of jobs. And this exposure to numerous types of jobs, that's the critical cog for us to do functional assessments. So let's look at a couple transition assessment fundamentals. IEPs, according to the law, our federal special education law, clearly state that they must include post-secondary goals, and the regulations, especially Indicator 13, indicates that we need to have annual transition goals to help meet the post-secondary goals. And these have to be based upon age-appropriate transition assessments. Age-appropriate for their chronological age, but I would add into that appropriate for a student's functional abilities as well, their practical abilities. If somebody can't read, you can't expect them to complete independently a written interest inventory. That's just a mismatch that just is totally inappropriate. So we need to find an assessment process, assessment tools, assessment process that matches students where they are so that they can engage in the process as much as possible to be able to make informed choices. And the assessments that we do have to be related to further education, employment, and independent living whenever it's needed. But when is it not needed? Everybody's going to live somewhere. So rather than just dismiss it and say, nope, that's for students in Mrs. Smith's class, instead, let's use data to let's use data to show that we don't need to focus on independent living. But more on that in a later webcast. CEC is the nation's premier organization, professional organization of special educators and administrators. It has many different divisions or many different parts to CEC. One of the divisions, and my favorite, happens to be the Division on Career Development and Transition, DCDT. And a number of years ago in the 90s, Pat Sitlington and her colleagues wrote a policy statement for the division on what transition assessment looks like and what it is. And what I find so cool is that the federal law pretty much encompassed CEC's policy statement on transition assessment. Isn't that pretty cool? So here's what DCDT said, is transition assessment is the ongoing process of collecting data on students' needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future working, educational, and living environments. The assessment results then serve as a common thread in the transition process and forms the basis for defining IEP goals and services. So the focus is upon students' future roles as workers and citizens. Student choice is a major theme throughout. Transition assessment is ongoing, future focus, person-centered. What that means is that for some students, it could be done annually. For other students, it might need to be done a couple times a year. For some students, it might need to be done weekly, especially when it comes in terms of a functional transition assessment. That is one that we have to do multiple times every year for it to have valid and reliable results. As much as possible and with support, we want students to direct their own transition planning. And the results of the transition assessment process will yield a match between strengths and needs and demands of the culture the student lives in and future environments. So as students leave school, they have a nice roadmap of where to go, and hopefully the support along the way enables them to do that when they roll down the assembly line of school and hop off into adult life. Hopefully they can move right into that plan that we've created for them, they've created for themselves. But to look at this, to look at functional assessment, I think we need to stop for a second and go into history a little bit and look at the evolution of employment programs. Not only is it a remarkable history, but it's a history that is filled with the importance of functional assessment. So let's begin. Mark Gold, he showed in the 70s that individuals with mental retardation could learn to do very complex skills. These were students who had moderate, severe mental retardation, intellectual disabilities, oftentimes vision impairments. And he used a bicycle brake to demonstrate that. A bicycle brake has many parts to it, and he would teach individuals how, in a very short time, how to put the bicycle brakes together. In my way of looking at the history of special education, his demonstrations and what he did changed the focus on employment for many people with significant support needs. And incidentally, when I was working on my doctoral degree at the University of Illinois, Mark Gold's office, he had left the U of I by then, and he was working privately, mostly as a consultant, doing a lot of training and writing. And his office was real close to where the College of Education was. And I went over and visit with him a couple of times and actually invited him to come speak in one of my classes. An amazing guy, a man who unfortunately died way too early due to some very invasive health problems. But Mark Gold demonstrated that individuals who, up until this time, really thought no one really thought they could do these very complex skills, and he demonstrated some very simple procedures of how students could be taught, individuals could be taught how to complete these complicated tasks. And then after that, I would say somewhat similar to, but after generally in the timeline, the US Department of Education, Office of Special Education, funded different demonstration projects around the country that showed how individuals with intellectual disabilities could become employed in community jobs. So sheltered workshops just were not the only location that we had to plan for. They could become employed in various community jobs. And these demonstration projects established a lot of the methodology, the initial methodology, but more importantly, demonstrated that it could be done. So two historical events that have had major impact on functional assessment. And then Brooke in 95 came up with this very simple yet profound concept that individuals with disabilities will obtain and maintain community employment with planned supports. So this means that somebody doesn't have to do it on their own. Instead, we'll provide support. The field, whether it's a school provided job coach, adult agency provided job coach, somebody from rehab, whoever, wherever it comes from, the individual would have support on the job support to be able to maintain the job. It doesn't mean that the support would do the job for the person, but would be there to teach needed skills, to help with any difficulties that arise, to deal just with the changing dynamics of a job site. So demonstration that somebody could do something complex, demonstration that individuals could become employed in community jobs. Then we add in, yes, in community jobs and with support. So that opened up the gate for even more people with disabilities to become employed in supported employment type jobs, both during the school years and afterwards. So it was a major shift in focus. It was a shift from just looking at competence. Does the person have the skill to do this? To a focus on how do we teach this and what supports do we need to provide so the person can successfully do this job. Major shift in focus, a major shift in focus. So we have an evolving methodology of job placement, so to speak, or helping someone find a job. Phase one was get a job, any job, and we keep that person in the job by providing support for that person. So get a job, any job. And we as professionals would find the job, and then we would, as a professional, take the person, put them in the job, and then we would give the support needed for the person to keep the job. Well, it seems obvious now, looking back through the lens of history, that that phase had to evolve to be effective. So phase two popped up. And in phase two, we get a job that we think that is a match between the person and the job, something the person would like. And then we use our supports to keep the job. But it's us interpreting what we think the person would like. And then we somehow will do job development to find a job in that particular area. Better than phase one, but it's us doing it for the person and interpreting for the person rather than the person themselves kind of guiding the process. And phase three then is self-directed employment. self-direct employment, where the individual themselves is the one who's helping to plot out the whole thing with support, of course, with lots of support along the way. So let's look at these in a little more detail. So phase one, get a job, any job. There were really no previous models to community employment. So the pioneers created this model. Russian mythog in the late 70s called this the place and train model, where we find a job, we do a job analysis, look at all the details of the job. We place the trainee on the job, teach him skills, and then we follow up occasionally to help the person maintain the job. Place and train. This is what the first demonstration projects really showed worked. It got people into jobs, but when we started looking at longevity of employment, individuals' happiness with employment, satisfaction with their job, something else needed to happen. And look at these questions. In phase one, get a job, any job. Look who answers these questions. Worker, task, and characteristic preference. Individual, teacher, job site personnel. No one answered those questions. What about looking at workers' skills and limits? The individual didn't, of course. The worker skills and limits, the teacher probably would have looked at those to see if those are somewhat of a match. And the job site personnel, maybe, or perhaps they just took the educator's word for it. What about job match interest? Individual didn't, the teacher didn't, the job site personnel didn't. Match skills and limits, individual didn't, the teacher probably did to some degree, but the job site, no. What about job accommodations? Individual, no. Teacher, yes. Job site, no. Look at the other three. Individuals never involved. The teacher is always involved. The job site some of the time, such as, can I do the job? Can I solve on the job problems? Should I stay or leave? That was never the individual that decided that. It was usually the teacher job site. However, it was incomplete, but it was a humble beginning. It began exodus from us always thinking that individuals with intellectual disabilities would go from school into sheltered workshops, or people in sheltered workshops would have to develop these skills, these elaborate skill sets before they could leave the sheltered workshop and go into a community job site. Because once you were in a sheltered workshop at this time, chances are you would never leave the sheltered workshop. So phase two developed. Phase two, get a job you think is a match, that you think, that you as the professional. So teachers would create the vocational profiles, sometimes in their mind, sometimes on paper, but they would develop jobs. The educators, job development people would find jobs that they thought would match the worker's skills and interest. And then the teacher would obtain the job. Then they would train the individual to do the job and fade to the lowest level of instruction that would maintain employment, and then monitor bits over time. It was a job where the educators, the professionals, were doing the thinking and the decision making, but they did have the student in mind. That's phase two. It's kind of like this. We have decided that you're a good digger. So do you want to dig a hole, dig a grave, dig a garden, or dig a ditch? Which one of those would you like to do? Well, it's choice, but we decided it's digging, but what particular type of hole would you like to dig? Well, it's kind of skewed choice at best. And in phase two, then, employment specialists determine the match between the person and the job. And then the worker's choice then becomes a reactive one. About the only choice they had was refuse, or if they went on the job and they didn't have a means to quit to move on to another job, they would surrender. They would just oftentimes just start performing so poorly, either socially, behaviorally, or performance-wise, that they were asked to leave. And so the worker's choice was a reactive choice, and it almost ended in a not a very positive way for the individual or the employer or the program that was placing the person on the job site. And in phase 2, where the educators did all the work, did the individual answer any of these questions? No. It was all the professionals, always the teacher, sometimes the job site personnel. It was better than the first phase, get a job, any job. But now we have phase 3 entered, which is the student-centered approach or student-centered assessment. And it's one where we have informed choice, where sufficient options exist so that the person can exercise control and autonomy over their life's direction. Boy, it sounds a lot like the definition of self-determination. And it teaches and provides opportunity for self-determination. So the individual makes job matches. The professionals set up the occasion for the person to make the job match, but the individual makes the job match. And the individual then is involved in solving on-the-job problems. Educators, support people will help define the parameters of the problem, but the individual will be intimately involved in coming up with ways to deal with it. And this approach, by the way, is supported by many professional groups. It's best practice, supported by policies, and in many ways, it seems to be what the spirit of the law really wants us to do. So the structure looks like this, where, whoops, click the wrong button here. So the structure looks like this, where we want somebody to think what I like, what I can do, what I want. What I like, what I can do, what I want. What I like, what I can do, what I want. And then once we have that, we develop a plan to obtain that. We take action on the plan, we evaluate the plan, and then we make adjustment on the plan. Make sense? So support has always been a major part of this. And Paul Wayman, who's a major leader in the area of supported employment, said if individuals are to experience personal satisfaction and quality of life, regardless of whether or not they have a disability, it is critical for them to have the right to make choices, express preferences, and exercise control in their life. And Parent said any shortcuts taken during the preference discovery period will most likely result in additional training and or support needs, job loss, and worker and employment and employer disappointment. And we saw that time and time and time. When I was at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, we operated through our Center for Self-Determination, an actual supported employment program. And sometimes, whether it was the funding source or the individual and their family didn't want to monkey around with an assessment process, the person needed a job tomorrow. And so shortcuts that did not go through a functional vocational assessment process. And we saw time after time after time that taking those shortcuts resulted in job loss and worker disappointment and employer disappointment. We ended up burning a few great employers because of that hurried up nature of getting someone into a job site. So what we want students to do through a functional vocational assessment process is to make choices and set goals based on an understanding of their interests, skills, and limits, express their goals to build support for those goals, establish a plan to attain their goal, evaluate their plan, and adjust their goal or plan. Make sense? The Rehabilitation Act tells us that students learn self-determination and self-advocacy skills to maximize empowerment and inclusion into our society. But how the heck do we do this? What efforts do we go through to make this happen? Well, it takes a few assumptions. We have to believe in a few things. Number one, individuals with disabilities, even individuals with significant support needs, do have personal preferences, likes and dislikes. Choice making is an individual selection of preferred alternative from among several familiar options. So the person's making the choice, but we're not asking them to make a choice over something they don't know about. We ask them to choose among familiar options. So it becomes a teaching, learning, assessment process for many individuals with significant support needs. And no consequence exists for selecting one choice over the other, except that comes with the choice itself. And this is really the hard part, we have to figure out a means for the individual to communicate preferences to us. And unfortunately, for some students, we just haven't figured out how to do that very well yet. And choice making, by the way, typically has to be taught, especially to students with significant support needs. And we have to provide opportunities for choice making. So what is informed choice? Quality of choice is dependent upon the amount of practice the person has in making choices. So if you're asked to make choices and you've never really had opportunity to do that before, your first choices are going to be hesitant, are not going to be very firm, and they might be really radical. They might vary a lot. They might be wishy-washy choices, or you might not even want to choose this. Why should I choose this when you've always chosen things for me? And it has to involve multiple individualized choice opportunities across time that become validated through on-the-job experiences. Requires direct exposure to and interaction with duties and job characteristics. In other words, somebody has to be in there to do it, to stand in it, to smell it, to do whatever the job is, for them to be able to learn it, for them to be able to communicate to us if that is something they would like to do or not. So here are some general questions that we want people to answer, that we want students to answer. Post-school goals: where do I want to live? Where do I want to work? Where do I want to learn after I leave high school? And then we have our annual transition goals. What do I need to learn now to live where I want? What do I need to learn now to do the career I want, to do the job I want? And what do I need to learn now to go to school where I want to go to school at, or to have that type of post-secondary education I want? Thank you, Gary Green and Carolyn Kochard, for coming up with those questions. So we have questions for students to answer at each phase of kind of the job assessment placement process. Assessment: what do I want? What's out there? Can I do it? Do I like it? And then as we get people more into a job, doing a job, and hopefully students, especially with more support needs, will leave school with the job in hand is best practice. We want students to say, what is my job? How do I do it? Do I like my job? And then they transition from school to out of school. How do I solve my on-the-job problems? And do I still like my job? So we need to provide, as educators, a means for students to answer these questions. They may not be able to verbally give us answers to these, but we can come up with methods to enable many students to tell us the answers to these questions. So we have different tools to help figure this out. So what do I want? One of the most powerful ones, especially for individuals who have never worked before, is the characteristics I like process, task I like, jobs I like. And then students have to learn what's out there. And for that, we have a process called characteristics I like versus those at a job site. We have job shadowing, job internships, in other words. And then can I do it? We have work, social, personal, and task contracts, job needs and accommodation processes, self-determination contracts. And do I like it? Do I like it? And through that, we again look at job characteristics I like versus those at this job site. And we look at task and job choice again. And each one of these have particular procedures to go through it. And as a whole, encompasses a complete functional analysis process. And as we looked at these questions before, the individual answers all of these questions, the teacher assists, and the job site personnel assist, all but in the first one. The worker determines task and characteristic preferences, not the teacher, not the job site personnel, but the individual. The individual figures out, answers the questions to the rest of these, and the teacher and educators and job site personnel assist so the student can answer these questions. So what are some issues we have to address? There's one, it's another historical bit of trivia, but one that has had profound influence in our field. Lou Brown was a professor at University of Wisconsin, and he coined the phrase criterion of ultimate functioning. And with the criterion of ultimate functioning, we teach skills today to enable the student to participate in the future environment they're going to be in. So in grade school, as somebody gets in the upper grades before they make the jump to middle or junior high, we have to teach the skills in grade school the student's going to need in middle school. Maybe they do a lot of rotation from class to class in middle school. So in the grade school years, we somehow got to figure out how to start teaching that skill for middle school. Likewise, from middle school to high school, from high school into the job site, and perhaps supported living arrangements. And then by high school age or before, the instructional focus has to be on skills that the student needs in the adult world. And the criterion of ultimate functioning guides us to focus on those future skills. And transition assessment then needs to measure student skills relative to that next environment, that future focus that the DCDT transition assessment policy statement addressed. In our field, there's no lack of interest assessments, written interest assessments, pictorial interest assessments. And most of these are designed as a one-shot assessment. You give the assessment once, we come up with the results, and we're done. We met our duty. We did a career interest assessment. You have to do one more to meet the intent of the law, because we have to do transition assessments across two domains, at least two domains. But it would meet the one for interest. However, these interest inventories so often, especially as we're working with students with significant or support needs, significant or just otherwise support needs, it doesn't meet the criterion of ultimate functioning. So will these assessments work? What do you think? Here's one that's been around for a long time. It's called the Reading Free Vocational Interest Inventory. It originally was designed for individuals with mental retardation or now intellectual disabilities. And it was the first one like this I ever saw. And let's look at some of the content to begin with. Look at the illustrations. We have two panels. That first panel looks like a waitress serving coffee, somebody taking out the trash. And that third panel, what is that person doing? Somebody looks like they're fluffing their hair or a hat, but there's someone in a dress, obviously with some kind of an apron or smock on. But what is that person doing to the individual's back? What job do you think this is? We'll come back to that. Look at the pictures in the bottom screen. Sweeping, stacking papers, helping somebody get dressed at a care facility. Those are all pretty clear. But what's that person doing in that upper panel, looking into the mirror? That happens to be, are you ready for this? If you look a little further into the picture, you see the sinks in the mirror. That person's a bathroom attendant. I mean, when was the last time you went to a place that had a bathroom attendant? And how about for our students? Do they go into many places where there's a bathroom attendant? And especially dumping things into a garbage can like that. Anymore, we mostly just use bags, plastic bags that are picked up and dumped in. Let's look at this assessment. Here we have, looks like sheep getting shaved, somebody working in a dry cleaner, stocking shelves. How many of your students have ever seen sheep being sheared? Are there even sheep raised in your area? Or last time you went to a theater, to a movie, to a play, did you have an usher show you to your seat? You know, we've gone to some my wife and I have gone to some really amazing things over the years, but I can only count on a few fingers the number of times we actually had an usher show us where to go. They might meet us up at the top of the stairs and point, but to actually show us all the way down, that just never happens. So what do you think of this? So that's one assessment. Reading free interest inventory. And then when it's scored, it's a norm reference, it's normed on other individuals with mental retardation. And it's scored based upon how these other people answered the question. So what if what I wanted to do was really off what other people with mental retardation wanted to do? My goodness, I would be classified as not scoring very well. Then we have COPS picks. The Career Occupational Preference System is a really well put together assessment career interest package, especially they have a written version that rehab counselors use a lot, has a lot of, it's well done, has a lot of supporting validity evidence behind it. And they have one now that is a pictorial version, really well quality illustrations. Here's a couple of them. It looks like what would you think, a forest ranger or a pastry chef? And it cost about $230. And so we go through and we give this assessment page by page to individuals with support needs. And, you know, are they looking at the details of the job? Are they just looking at the person's hat? Maybe they like the hats they wear, or they think they're funny, so they're not going to select that. Or maybe they've never seen anybody wear a baker's hat before or a chef's hat. You know, so if we do this one time and the student probably doesn't know what a lot of these things are, even though they're illustrations, and it really doesn't take any reading to complete this, will that really have any meaning for the student? You know, probably not. But the functional vocational assessment process uses a student-centered approach, one that is geared toward the community where the person lives, and it's repeated across time. So what does the law actually say? The law says, and when appropriate, we need to do a functional vocational evaluation. And when to consider what's appropriate? Well, I think the easiest way to define that is when the paper, pencil, or web-based or computer-based interest inventories simply don't do the job. So what is a functional assessment then? The law doesn't define it for us, but based on the literature, I've pulled this together, that a functional assessment process is completed over time. It uses a repeated, measured situational assessment. Boy, that's a lot in that word. Repeated measures, meaning we keep track of data repeatedly over and over and over and over again. And situational means it takes place in the exact community where the jobs are at. And then we use tools so that the person can communicate their preferences directly to us. And then we capitalize on what's called a discrepancy problem. A discrepancy problem. Discrepancy, things don't line up. And when things don't line up, that gives us a lot of information, and the student too. So a discrepancy problem, it's logical choice making happens when chosen preferences. These are the things I really like. Like I really like to get up early in the morning. I like to wear a uniform. I like to work in a noisy place. I like to work where it's fast paced. I like to work. But then this internship or this job site where I'm at now, it doesn't meet most of those. So do I like that job or not? They have a job opening, I could get it, but it doesn't have anything I like. So, that's not logical choice making. And so discrepancy problems happen when a chosen job, task, or characteristics, they don't match specific jobs. And discrepancy issues decrease when the job characteristics match the preferences. The actual characteristics at the job site match what the person likes. And so our task then is to provide students ample opportunities to determine matches and job matches across a number of characteristics. And when they have the best match of what we found, when jobs match the best, the job is more likely, the person is more likely to stay in that job and be happy in that job than if the job doesn't match what this individual's characteristics are. So for choice, then, the repeated measures situational assessment process provides assessment items in a way that students can use them. We present items in a paired format, direct communication of what the student wants, repeated opportunities to make choices, experience with the choice so they can really learn what those choices mean and if they still want to make that same choice or not, and assessment across blocks of time to verify choice. The time allows students to change their choice or to continue with the same choice if they find they really like it. So the basic procedures is this. This is clearly designed for a high school type program. So before visiting a job site, the student will select preferred task and characteristics using a pictorial or written assessment form, which we'll look at here briefly. Then they'll go visit the job site, spend time either watching or doing some of the task. And then after the visit, they'll compare what they initially thought with what those things were that at the site. And then we repeat this multiple times across numerous sites. And then we might have 6 job sites that our students will go through, and we'll have 6 site comparisons to see which one of these does the student like the best. And then the student could choose to maybe do an internship at that location. So for tasks, the same thing happens with the task. So we interview students, if possible, parents, caregivers, adult program staff, and others to determine the environments that they live and work in. We examine their desired post-school environment, and especially to come up with the skills that the student should learn to complete as independently as possible. And then we do a task analysis on those essential skills, and then we convert those essential skills into a task analysis scoring sheet to see how someone does. So to do a complete task analysis, we break a skill into smaller doable parts. We number each step. We add a scoring system beside each step, plus or minus, yes or no, level of prompt needed to complete the step, and circle the last step completed independently, like this. Here's one for toothbrushing. We've all probably seen something like this before. So pick up the toothbrush, yes or no, level of prompt needed to complete this, verbal, point, physical. So this time the person was able to spit out the water all by themselves, so we circle that skill. Get the idea. And so this is how we can do skill assessments for job skills this same way. We can identify the task that someone has to do involved in a job and come up with scoring systems similar to this. So we do various task analyses. Each major step of a job can be broken into smaller steps. If needed, we come up with a scoring system. We graph results across time. And then we recommend at least 5 opportunities every day to engage in these tasks. And it's a very valid and reliable method. And then we come up with a graph so we can graph the data. This one happens to be the percent of steps completed independently. And we just keep track. This one was with the toothbrushing example, but we could do this with job task as well. We just plot what somebody did with a particular job task. And it's a way to do functional assessment on actual job skills. So there's 2 sources that are great for conducting functional vocational assessment: choosing employment goals and self-directed employment. Both of these are available at no cost from the OU Zero Center website. And let's delve into these a little bit. So to begin the assessment process, especially with someone new, you have to know what they've done before. We could ask them. That might give some answers if the person can answer it. So we have this form. It's actually longer than this. This is just a couple rows of it. We ask the person, well, what jobs have you done before? And we go through item by, have you done store work, laundry, food service? That's a feather duster, by the way, with the maid service, childcare, and so forth. And the student circles what they've done. Because when we start assessing, we want to know if they only choose the things they've done before or not. What task have you done? Same thing. At your job site you've had, what task have you done? If they haven't had previous jobs, then don't worry about this. What jobs do you like that you've done before? And what task did you like? And all these illustrations can be downloaded at the brookspublishing.com picture bank website. And you just go to this website and click the download buttons, or you can download all the buttons. And they look like this. You go in, you grab one of them with your screenshot selector, open it up, expand it, shrink it, put it into your assessment form. You can do 2 drawings per page, 1 drawing per page, 4 drawings per page, whatever form you like. One of the most effective ways we found for people who've never worked before, it's called the job characteristics I like process. It introduces the match between what I like and what's at this job. What we found for people who have never worked before, it's not the job itself that's so important. It's the characteristics of the job that seem to make all the difference. So if you were just to do one of these, if that's all you could do, this is the one I would do, is the job characteristics I like. And we come up with the percent of matches of what I like that's versus all of these different job sites. It has to be done in conjunction with vocational experience. So many school programs will set up a job rotation where they have, might spend 2 or 3 weeks at this site, then spend a couple hours a week at this site, and then a couple hours a week at another. You get the idea. They rotate across job sites, and at each job site, they identify the characteristics I like, and then they start comparing it to what's at the job site. And it can be done using written or illustrated assessment tools. Here's the written tool. Oftentimes the student on Monday morning, say, will fill out in the classroom what I like. And you can circle one or both of them. Do I like to work alone or with lots of people around? Personally, I like both of those. So I would circle both of those. Quiet workplace, noisy workplace. Well, once again, I like both of those. Weekdays, weekends, well, I prefer weekdays. Easy job, challenging job, well, I like both of those. Do I like to dress up for work, to not dress up, wear uniform? Well, I don't really want to wear a uniform. Sometimes I like to dress up. You get the idea. And so students select what they like, and then they spend a few days or a few hours at this site. They fold the paper along that line, and then they go back without looking at the first one. What's at this job site? Well, at this job site, there's always lots of people around. I'm working at Chick-fil-A, always lots of people there. It's not quiet, not real noisy. I put noisy. Have to work their weekends and weekdays. It's a challenging job. It's always really busy, always lots of issues. I have to wear a uniform. I have to stand up. I have to move around. And does this match what I like? If it's a match, then it's a yes. If it's not a match, it's a no. So the key is we want to find those places where most of the matches exist. Makes sense? Can also be done with illustrations. And this has some of the same issues with illustrations that you probably ran into or have thought about, because it's hard to depict with pictures everything you want a picture to depict. But we can work alone or work with others, work in a quiet place, work in a loud place, dress up for work, don't have to dress up, physical thinking, work fast, speed. I like that one the best. Work fast, where speed is not important. And so we choose what I like. That's what I like. And then we match it to what's at the job site using illustrations. And these, after you've done this with students after a while, many will eventually learn what each of the pictures mean. And then we graph the results. And think about the power that comes when a student can hold up this graph and say, Mom and Dad, this is at their transition IEP meeting, I've been doing transition assessment, and this is what I really like. See that longest line? I like to work with. Now, what is that, teacher? Oh, I like to work with lots of people around. I like a noisy workplace. I like either weekdays or weekends. It doesn't make any difference. I want a challenging job. I want to wear a uniform. And you see all these lines pop up. And so students will oftentimes start thinking one way and then flip. So you'll have some movement, but then the other one will win out. And so we come up with a valid, reliable assessment that would count as meeting that criteria of having an assessment that has valid evidence supporting the results. So here's what it looks like. So what I like, what's here, is it a match? That's the essence. And if they don't match, well, then that's not for me. So work alone, quiet, work alone, lots of people. Matches? What do you think? Yes or no? Well, it's not a match. I really like to work alone, and at this place I have to work alone with lots of people around, so it really isn't a match. Then we calculate the percent of matches at job site characteristics. That's a match. So we have repeated opportunities to make choices, direct communication of choices, students experience the choice, we assess across blocks of time to verify choice, we present stimuli in a manner that the student understands, and oftentimes in a paired format. The discrepancy problem we've talked about. We can do the same thing with job duties. Job duties I like. We've identified at this job, there are 4 primary duties. And at the end of doing those, you ask, do I like this or not? And we come up with the percent of job duties I like. Task preferences, same different format. We write the task. We check how much we like those. And we rank them 1, 2, 3. So you're here for 3 days. And then each day you give it a rank if you liked it or not. And then you just do your task preference. Job duties, how we did. We can look at actual performance, where we evaluate speed, accuracy. I evaluate it, then I ask my supervisor or paraprofessional or job coach to evaluate me, and is there a match? And what we've found, if it's not a acquisition issue, if it's a fluency issue or a speed issue, then this self-evaluation process can do a lot to speed the person's skill up. If it's an acquisition issue, this person simply doesn't know how to do it, then we have to stop and teach the person how to do it before we can expect improved performance. So it looks like this. Job duty 1, whatever it is. I evaluate myself, how I did. I then fold it, give it to my supervisor. I ask my supervisor to evaluate how I did. My speed, I thought I did very good. Independent, I did very good. Accuracy, I was very good. It was very accurate. Give it to my supervisor, and we ask the supervisor to give feedback each time. Speed, well, you were okay. To be able to be here, the standard is 12 widgets an hour. You do 7 widgets an hour. So for a new worker, your speed's okay, but it's not very good yet. Independent, you thought very good. Well, I'm going to put needs improvement, because your coworkers had to help you a lot to be able to complete these widgets. Or your accuracy, I agree. What you did was very accurate. So matches, 1 out of 3 matches. And so we look at job task completion and the percent of job task of the evaluation of job task as another measure of work performance. So rather than waiting until the end of the internship or the end of the shadowing experience, whatever the case might be, we get feedback every day, and then we can make adjustments along the way, because so many times at job sites, the employer will get a evaluation form 6 weeks later and ask to evaluate how the person did. For our students, that's too little feedback, way too late. To expect someone to change and to learn what they need to do better, they need a much more frequent and more dynamic feedback loop. Come up with a percent of supervisory comments, and then we can graph it out to see if this is a good match for actual performance. We can also focus on work social personal skills if we want. The kind of the intangible skills, the social interaction skills, as well as performance skills in a little different way. Follow company rules, come to work, adjust safely. I evaluate it, supervisor evaluates it. Much the same, but it expands from just task into some of the other areas, like follow directions or follow company rules. For social, personal. good grooming, behaves appropriately, because those can be issues at the job site as well. And then individuals can come with an employment plan. It has their top characteristics, the top tasks they like, their top job choices, and yet we all have things to improve in, can identify the skills they still need to improve in, and finally, my top job choice, all delivered with illustrations. What do you think? So that's how we do a functional vocational assessment process. For someone who doesn't read very well or doesn't read at all, it takes a lot of, the individuals who are doing this will need some prep time to put all this together. But once it's all put together, it can be implemented like clockwork, and the process works very well. But it does take working together to make a functional assessment happen. It's a collaborative team effort. Well, thank you very much for the Illinois Center for Transition and Work. I am Jim Martin. Bye-bye.